Okay, so today for the ABR meeting of August 6th, staff will open the meeting since our chair and vice chair are both absent today, and we need to appoint a chair pro tem to run this meeting. So we'll just take nominations for the chair pro tem to run the meeting today.
I nominate Keith.
Keith, you mentioned that you have to step down
yes.
on item 1 anyway?
Right, Tony, I have to step down for item 1, so that'd be a little awkward, perhaps. I have to appoint yet another person.
Okay, all in favor of Gary being chair pro tem today?
Aye.
Okay. All right.
Five after 3, and I'd like to open up the Board of Architectural Review. We will start with public comment. Is anybody from the audience, member of the audience, like to comment on anything that is not on the agenda? Seeing no one come up, we'll move to item B, approval of the minutes of the Architectural Board Review, July 23rd.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
Motion. Keith made the motion, second by Chris. And get that right here ready. Anything before item 1? Anything on item 1? Item 2, Delavina Street. Item 3, Coast Village Road. And that is it. So a motion to approve the minutes. Guess we had that already. So let's go on to, did we have minutes for the... Oh,
We just need a vote on those minutes.
right. Can we have a vote on the minutes to approve the minutes for the 23rd? All in favor?
Aye.
Sorry.
Out for 2 items.
Okay. 3 ayes, 2 abstentions. Okay. And do we have minutes for the 30th? Just consent calendar. So a motion to approve consent calendar for July 23rd. Moved by Chris, second by Keith.
Mr. Chair, I need to read just item D. On July 23rd, we ratified the consent calendar of July 23rd, except for item D. That was a review after final for a minor change to patio and landscaping for Chick-fil-A at 3707 State Street. And our consent reviewer stepped down from reviewing that review after final. So after the full board meeting, Paul Zink reviewed it. So at the beginning, of the meeting on the 23rd, we tabled the item, and then right after the conclusion of the full board meeting, Paul Zink reviewed and approved that as submitted. So we just need to ratify that one item on July 23rd. So we've got a motion, so we can just vote on that one item.
Do I have a motion to review that item?
We just need a vote. We have the motion.
I believe we need a motion, don't we?
To ratify it. We had a... Didn't you all make a motion just now to ratify the consent calendar for July 23rd?
There was a motion
Right.
made to ratify. Yeah, it has to
Yeah,
be voted on.
let's vote on it. All in favor?
For political reasons, I cannot vote on that. So,
Let's see.
I'm abstaining.
Abstaining. Well, I guess we've got... So you all are not willing to approve a very minor change to the patio and landscaping at Chick-fil-A?
I just wasn't here, so I can't vote.
it was on consent. Can I have a motion to table the item till we have a larger review board?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
So we can table that for 2 weeks.
Second. Okay, motion has been seconded to table that review till the next meeting.
We need to vote.
Can I get a vote on that? Yes, thanks.
I can vote on that. Aye.
Aye. Okay.
So let's go to the consent calendar for July 30th.
Sorry about that. The chair should not have his phone on.
So I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Second? All right. And
Okay, so consent calendar last week, July 30th, we had item A, 422 Old Coast Highway, was continued 1 week. Item B, 1187 Coast Village Road, got a project design approval and final approval with conditions. Consent last week was reviewed by Keith Rivera and Chris Gilliland.
Okay. And can I get a motion on that then, to approve the minutes? Can we vote on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? One abstention, motion carries.
Okay, now August 6th consent calendar.
Motion to approve August 6th consent calendar.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
It's been moved and seconded. Keith and Chris.
Okay, consent calendar today, we had item A, an intersection improvement at Calle Noguera and Calle Lorales. Got a final approval with the condition. Item B, another intersection improvement, this is at Delavina Street and Figueroa Street. Got a project design approval and final approval with a condition. Item C, 1924 Emerson Avenue, a review after final was approved as submitted. Item D, 1900 Chapala Street, got a project design approval and final approval with conditions. Item E, 422 Old Coast Highway was, that's project design approval and final approval as submitted. Consent today was reviewed by Keith Rivera and Chris Gilliland.
Okay. Can we get a vote on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Okay, move on to announcements and requests by applicants for continuance, withdrawals.
I have an announcement.
Okay.
Chairman Russell, I brought cupcakes. So anyone who would like to have a cupcake, please help yourself.
All right. Good. Any special occasion, just felt?
Yeah.
the need for cupcakes. Okay, great. Any subcommittee reports?
Sure. The only other announcement is we know Dawn Sherry and Paul Zink are both absent today.
Okay. As far as subcommittee reports, we did have the wireless. I know Paul is out, but I did do some site visits on some of the remote sites. They're increasing the size of the antennas, and they did have they had a location that was completely overgrown, and they went and got a new location on Hot Springs Road. The antennas are kind of minor, so we're still working together with Paul and Jaime on that. And next would be the discussion item. Average unit density incentive program.
Chair Pro Tem, members of the ABR, my name is John Ledbetter. I'm Principal Planner in the Long Range Planning section of the Planning Division, and we're here before you today to make a presentation on the average unit size density incentive program. Will be an ordinance. We're working to develop an ordinance based on the program as outlined in the general plan update that was adopted in December of last year. And we have been continue to work with the same group that we worked with initially to do the design charrette with the AIA to help work through some of these development standards, kind of the mechanics of how this program will work in this ordinance. And we have made this presentation to the Planning Commission, got some initial comments from them. Most of their comments were more focused on the affordability parts of the program and specifically towards the employer housing. And then last week we went to the HLC and got comments from them as well. Hopefully you did have a chance to look at the staff report that was we forwarded to you from that we presented to the Planning Commission. And again, what we're most interested in from you folks is any and all comments on the development standards and the review process. Those are the things we're most keenly interested in, since that's kind of your area of expertise. But we're certainly interested in any other comments you might have as well. So with that, sort of setting the context for it, I'll turn it over to Ms. Ensueta, who is the project manager on this, and she'll make the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and board members. As Mr. Ledbetter said, we're here before you this afternoon to present the average unit size density incentive program and receive comments from your board with respect to the components of the program. Oops. There we go. As you know, the general plan was updated or approved. The update was approved in December of 2011, and a part of that approval was the policies that direct the implementation of this program. And the objectives are to replace the existing variable density incentive program, encourage small units and buildings, protect historic resources, locate housing near commercial uses, especially with respect to access to transit and easy walking and biking, and also to produce long-term priority housing. Council, as part of their approval, did provide direction with respect to the following components of the program: that the densities be set for the medium-high designated areas at 15 to 27 dwelling units per acre. The high-density areas would be at 28 to 36 dwelling units per acre. And the priority housing overlay would allow densities up to 63 dwelling units per acre. They also directed that for those projects developing under the AUD program, that 1 space per unit would be allowed and no guest parking. Locations would be mostly in the multifamily and commercial zones, and that the program would be on a trial basis for 8 years or 250 units, whichever occurs first. And the 250 units would be those units located in the high-density areas. These are just maps showing you where the high-density, I'm going to show you a series of maps, but this one is the medium-high density that allows the 15 to 27 dwelling units per acre, and you can see where those areas are designated. This is a map of the areas that are designated high density under this particular program that allow the 28 to 36 dwelling units per acre, and as you can tell, it's the downtown area, the Milpas corridor, and the La Cumbre Plaza 5 Points area. This map just combines both of those designated areas. And then there's the priority housing overlay, which basically is the high-density area and also the CM zone that is located in this area. Those particular areas would be allowed up to 63 dwelling units per acre. And then this makes up the map that is what we call the average unit size density incentive program. The key components of the program that staff is currently working on and is bringing to you and asking for your comments are the average unit size ranges that would be allowed under the densities, the priority housing, the flexible development standards, the review process, and compatibility findings. With respect to the average unit size ranges under the medium-high density, the range would be from 1,450 square feet to 805 square feet. Under the high density, it would be 1,245 square feet to 970. And then the priority housing overlay would allow a range of 970 to 811 square feet. And the premise here is that the greater the density, the smaller the unit size. This is a table. It's a little hard to see, but basically it shows you the medium-high density. Here's the progression from the 15 to the 27 dwelling units per acre, what the average unit size ranges are, the maximum total square footage for the residential portion of the project, and also the FAR that would be that would correspond to this density. The high density also shows the average unit size, the density per acre, the total square footage, and the FAR. And then this is the priority housing overlay, and that shows you the entire progression from the 37 dwelling units to the 63 dwelling units per acre, and how that would break out. With respect to the priority housing, staff envisions that rental projects that would be developed under this particular program would be 100% rental, so the entire project would be all rental, and that it would remain rental for the life of the project. Also, with respect to the employer-sponsored housing, again, we anticipate that the units in the project would all be employee housing. They would remain such for the life of the life of the property, and also that there would be some affordability requirements associated with the units. And also, limited equity cooperatives are part of this priority housing, and typically these units would be for moderate income households, and we don't anticipate that there would be a lot of affordability requirements for the project. Staff also envisions an employer-sponsored housing program and in order to achieve the goals of the AUD program with respect to employee housing. The objectives of the program would be to produce or develop workforce housing, also to maintain it in long-term affordability, and to have flexibility in the program so that we could attract employers to participate in the program. Preliminary program parameters that we have discussed are the participation of employers in the program. We expect that it could be a sole employer or a consortium of employers. Also, that covenants and or development agreements would be used to be to apply to the projects in order to keep the units in long-term affordability, and the affordability requirements that that would apply in order to keep them in the priority housing category. There are also development standards that we are anticipating some flexibility for projects that develop under the AUD program. As we indicated earlier, City Council has already directed that a minimum owned space per unit and no guest parking can be applied to projects developing under this program. Also, supported by a design charrette that was conducted by the AIA in 2011, we are contemplating a one space per 500 square foot for commercial parking of a mixed-use project. The Central Business District does allow that now, but this would apply for all mixed-use projects that would develop under this program. And other reductions in flexibility that could be applied to projects would be tandem parking or car stacking devices as part of a way to apply flexibility and reduce parking. And these type of approaches are supported by the general plan. With respect to variable setbacks, the CM and the C2 zone currently do not require setbacks. And so the proposal is to apply a 5-foot frontage variable setback in these zones. And that would exclude State Street between Montecito and Sola Street. And the objective for this is to provide for landscaping and pedestrian amenities and openness along the frontage of buildings in this area. Also, with respect to open space, currently, and I'm sure you are very aware of this, a mixed-use project that is developing can either use a method A, which is the private outdoor living space method, or method B, the common outdoor living space. Under method A, as you know, the project is required to provide the private outdoor living space for each unit, as well as a 10% open space on grade, and then also a common open area of 15 by 15 feet. The proposal is to eliminate the 10% open space on grade aspect of this particular method. The reason being is that this particular requirement was originally for residential projects developing in the multifamily zones, or exclusively residential in the commercial zone. And this would, eliminate this requirement for mixed-use projects. Also, it appears to be a hardship or difficult for projects who want to build a parking garage, an at-grade parking garage. And then the other proposal is to allow flexibility in the location of the 15% for method B. It would still be required. Currently, it's required on grade, but it would be it would allow flexibility in that it would be allowed on the upper floors of the project. With buildings that develop over 45 feet, Only those buildings that meet the community benefit project criteria would be allowed to develop or exceed the 45 feet. There would be compatibility findings that would be made for these projects. And also, it would require a supermajority vote by the Planning Commission to be able to develop. There would be 5 votes of the Planning Commission. While the ordinance amendments are being developed for this program, an interim review process would be implemented, and it would allow projects who meet the intent of an AUD program, to be processed with zoning modifications to meet the density criteria and some of the standards, the development standards. Also, there would be a concept review early in the process to receive feedback from the City Council or Planning Commission with respect to those zoning modifications, and we anticipate that this would actually expedite the review process for the projects. After these zoning amendments are processed and approved, the ABR and the HLC would continue their practice of reviewing rental projects. However, for those projects that come before you that are over the 45 feet, which would be the priority housing projects, the Planning Commission would make the findings for the building to exceed the 45 feet. And then the ABR would approve the project, or, you would review the project. Staff hearing officer, again, we anticipate the same practice that currently is being that currently happens, and except with projects that are 45 feet and above, would go to the Planning Commission first for findings, and then the staff hearing officer would approve the project. And the Planning Commission, you can see that they are charged with the multifamily projects over 5 units, mixed-use projects, and they would be making findings. These are the projects that would be developed under the AUD. With respect to the compatibility findings, this is a start for the findings, and I just want to make a statement that this is not all-encompassing, but this is our first attempt to provide you with what we feel compatibility findings might be for the projects. You'll notice that they're pretty similar to what you already make for the projects that you review. But so there'd be neighborhood compatibility findings. Also, with respect to landmarks and historic resources, there would be a finding for that. We want to also ensure that there's adequate open space. So we have a finding that addresses that. And then we have the variable front setback. That would also be a finding. And with respect to unit affordability, we want to make sure that the projects that are being reviewed under the priority housing program would be affordable, so they would mostly be the rental and the employer-sponsored housing. And for today, as we indicated earlier, we would like to receive from your board your comments with respect to the program, the components, specifically the development standards and the review process for the AUD. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Any questions? Keith, I see you have some notes.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, a couple questions. The one chart had a FAR component. I was wondering if you could explain that a little more detail and give a definition. For example, is parking and common area included in that FAR, or is that just the FAR of the housing component?
I believe that's just the housing portion.
Because, yeah, on the lower end of your density scale, the 0.5 seemed low. Okay. And then could you also explain how the variable setback would work? Since a 5-foot setback, so is that then an average 5 foot that's taken across the site, or could you just elaborate on that?
Right, it would be variable, so it could vary along the frontage. There's different ways of calculating that, and so that's still details that we would work out. But it's anticipated that it would be, it would vary. It could be 5 across the frontage, or it could vary in different areas of the frontage, so that it averages out to the 5 foot.
So, Chair and members of the board, so for example, you could either have a 5 foot straight across, or if it was on a corner, perhaps you wanted to create a little plaza or something that would be 25 foot deep for only 5 foot distance. And the idea is to give some flexibility to the designers so that you can use the specifics of the site and the design of the project to their best advantage.
So, for example, in a mixed-use project, that could be kind of the trade-off for the removal of the 10% open space requirement that we currently have, because you're now providing theoretically open space at the street.
That's correct. I mean, we do want there to be some open space in the front.
And then last question, is the interim review process in place now? Can someone come forward with an application? And how would that process work?
Right now, we obviously still have our existing requirements and regulations in place. The way it would work is that we would review the project to see whether the intent of the AUD is being met. If you have a project that is proposing higher densities, and we would anticipate that the development standards that, or I should say the zoning modifications that would be applied for would be like the density, lot area modifications, the open space modification, parking. So those are the parameters that I think that would be the most likely to be part of an AUD project.
So it would still be a more or less standard process, like a DART or PRT process,
Right,
but there wouldn't be any kind of new component that you're adding in this interim portion.
Right. It would still be the same process. You would be going through the DART and the review process. It would just be that we would be looking at the project and reviewing it against the objectives of the AUD and whether it meets that intent.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I think most of my concern sort of circles around the neighborhood compatibility issue, because obviously with these much higher densities, we're likely to get projects that are out of scale with the rest of the neighborhood or most of the neighborhood that they're being located in. And I'm just wondering if maybe there should be some language put in that addresses that. I'm not sure exactly what that would be at this point, but just that, the typical neighborhood compatibility standards that we might apply, for example, to a house that's larger than most of the houses on the street, there might be some way to place a better to allow for something that's larger than its current surroundings. And I don't have language in mind. I'm just thinking that those need to be modified, possibly for units like for projects like this. And then I have a couple questions about if a project goes of this size goes to Planning Commission first. It seems to me that there could be some difficulty there, and I'm wondering why that was put forth, because it seems like I know currently there's an issue where we can go through multiple reviews at ABR, then get to Planning Commission and have Planning Commission reduce the project substantially or suggest changes architecturally even, and then it comes back to ABR for several more reviews. So it can turn into a long process, but it seems like there should be at least a preliminary review, even if just to get comments from ABR before they go to Planning Commission, so that some of the beginning concerns about compatibility and architectural appropriateness are addressed, at least have been included in the comments that then arrive at the Planning Commission. I don't know if you have any comments about that.
No, but I think that would be something that we would want to hear from you, that would be maybe an added, I don't want to say step, because, but that would be something that would be appropriate to have, to go to the PC before they make their findings.
Chair and members of the board, if you'll recall, not all projects will go to the Planning Commission. So if it's an all rental project below 45 feet or up to 45 feet, it'll stay here, won't even go to the Planning Commission. Similarly, if it's a 4-unit condo, it'll go to the show. But we did anticipate that if it is going to go to the Planning Commission, if it's more than five or plus units, or it goes beyond 45 feet, it would come here first for a concept review. That was kind of the idea.
So that links up with the question about zoning modifications, because if it has, obviously, maybe this is going to, the fact that you've reduced it, the parking requirements to one space per unit, maybe it would lessen the need for zoning modifications. But if there are modifications, it would go to Planning Commission. Right? Again, I think, just a suggestion that it might be worth thinking about whether there should be at least be one preliminary stop at ABR before it goes on. But I also wonder about the language regarding zoning modifications, or how that's going into the ordinance, because currently zoning by ordinance zoning modifications are allowed, but with current climate, it's been my experience that they typically aren't approved once it gets to Planning Commission. Even if ABR finds it that there's no visual impacts or impacts to neighbors or neighborhood, still it can often be denied at Planning Commission just on the basis that it is a modification. So I'm just wondering if you have any comments about that.
I think that the intent for having the Planning Commission or I think it's the Planning Commission review projects in the interim. You're talking about the interim process that we
Not
we
necessarily.
set out?
No,
Just any modification.
Yeah.
I guess my thought is that the Planning Commission usually reviews the projects that do have modifications. You're right. Sometimes they don't agree with the modifications. I don't know if this process is going to be any different.
Okay.
Just one further comment on that. Again, I think it's important that we differentiate between the interim process where, we will be seeing quite a few modifications, and the final process once the ordinance is adopted. The whole idea here is that with these projects, we do want to be as flexible as we can in order to make the projects work. in the interim process, yeah, there will be modifications, but maybe what would be helpful from you is to get some input. So, for example, when the council gave us direction on the interim process, and actually it was the Planning Commission as well at the joint meeting, they said, well, we like the idea of an early concept review at that level, maybe even at the council level, so that we could give direction that this is the kind of project we want to see, and it's employer all affordable, it's 60 feet in height, whatever, and so we think you should make this happen.
Okay.
It's in the right location, and there's no historic resources around it, and
And then go to ABR.
yeah, and then go to ABR, and then it would have some clear direction early on. That might be a comment from you that, we think it should go to council, or we think it should go to planning commission and council during the interim, or, so that's the kind of thing we'd like to hear from you, since you do have experience with that.
Stephanie, any question?
I would agree with what Kirk said about the neighborhood compatibility and needing some language to address that, as well as traffic impacts. And I would add that there needs to be something about traffic. That's my only comment.
Chris?
Oh.
Mr. Chair, if more?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay.
How do they determine a community priority project?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
How is a community priority project determined?
Oh, the rental and the employer housing and equity, those were project, I don't remember exactly, but as part of our the Plan Santa Barbara, our general plan update, as we were going through, those particular type of housing were determined to be the priority that we wanted to focus our programs on, to be able to develop those type of projects.
And Chair, members of the board, may I help elaborate on that a bit as well? So you have the housing priority projects. Those come in three flavors, if you will. And as Ms. Unsueta elaborated on, the rental, the employer, and the equity. But then larger than that, you have the community benefit projects.
Yeah.
And housing is one component of that. And again, this is what was adopted as part of the general plan. They did specify, and typically this is kind of a carryover from the Measure E findings that we had, for what used to be referred to as community priority type projects. So those would be ones, in this case, it would be like a rec center or a hospital, or those that are identified as by the council as a community priority, and those are the ones that we want to see built, and that would get the square foot designation. And so the priority housing is one component of those, and so we're kind of drilling down into that right now.
Okay, that's it.
Yikes. A couple questions. I'm wondering, the elimination of the 10% open space, where did that originate?
That actually originated as part of the process for the alternative height amendment that was going through. As the discussions were happening with respect to the height issue, one of the discussions was the open space and that particular aspect. And so one of the things that came out of that was that when, whether or not the initiative or the amendment actually went forward, that should still continue and go forward as a separate project. So that is one of the things that we're trying to do with this. We've incorporated into this program, and the 10%. I believe that was actually thought to be eliminated as part of another amendment package. I can't remember when exactly that went through, and it didn't quite end up the way staff envisioned that it should. The 10% was originally intended for residential projects in the multifamily and commercial zones, but now it's being applied. The way the ordinance is written, it applies to mixed use as well. And the commercial, the commercial projects don't require that, right?
And then the 15 would be flexible, the 15%?
Yes,
so it could be on the second floor or third floor?
Correct. As it currently reads in the ordinance, it is required on grade. So this would allow flexibility in where that particular space would be provided.
So how do we avoid the elimination of all open space on ground floor? I mean, are we allowing then building from property line to property line with no consideration of any landscaping?
I believe that I believe that they still have to provide some commercial zones do have some type of setback, so that it's the 15% is the 15% of the net lot area. So let me just check really quick.
And chair, members of the board, all the projects will still be required to put in the 5-foot variable setback as part of the program.
All the projects are just, I noticed there was something that said.
All the
solar.
except with the exception along State Street between Sola and Rio, I think.
And just in the C2 and CM zone.
Okay.
And one more question. I think this was brought up at the city council meeting, but this the new setbacks in the C2 and CM, the 5-foot variable required. I think someone brought up the fact that there are existing lots that would be existing non-conforming in that situation. So how is that rectified? I mean, if you have an existing lot and they want to make changes and they don't have those setbacks, how is that approached?
Well, we anticipate that it would be, we have a non-conforming ordinance those projects would become non-conforming, and they would have to adhere to the ordinance, the things that they can and cannot do, and we anticipate that will happen to some properties.
So in other words, if it's a minor change of 10%, it doesn't really affect it, but if it's like 60, 70%, you're only leaving 30%, then we'd look at turn to that ordinance.
One other thing, as we're going through and developing the language for this particular program, and we think it's going to be a standalone ordinance, and we would be able to put in language with respect to the nonconformancies.
I do have one question, and that would be in regards to, in the new ordinance, there is a ruling about the 450 feet from the freeway about building only single-family homes in that area. And I've noticed that on your overview of the plan, there's quite a bit of this area that's allotted next to the freeway. How does this new ordinance address that?
Perhaps I can address that. Though that setback, if you will, that was designed to meet the recommendations of the Air Quality Board would still be in place. So the overlays really don't extend into those areas, that the setback from the freeway. So the AUD would not be applicable to that setback area.
I'd like us to compile some comments for you to take with you.
Yes, very much so. We would appreciate your comments. You don't need to make a motion on it, but any of your comments would be most helpful and appreciated.
Well, I think some good comments that were said here that should be incorporated should be the neighborhood compatibility comment, and I think that perhaps we should review that it should be ABR prior to going to PC. I think that I would agree with Kurt on that it would be much better to get a preliminary review prior to even the over height limit prior, because a lot of times we chop that down too before it goes to PC. So I think getting an aesthetics point of view prior to PC would be a good thing. So any other comments you think that we really should incorporate?
What I was suggesting is that it be a very conceptual review, and that not that we would make comments and then they would have to come back again and we make comments again. It would just be like a single review, and we would put together a list of comments or concerns, and then the project could move on if they wanted to. If they wanted to come back and address them, they could, but if they wanted to move on, they could as well. That was my suggestion. And then, I mean, I'd be happy to work with a couple other board members in trying to formulate some language regarding neighborhood compatibility, if that would be helpful. But I'm not prepared to do it right now. But
yes, that would be very helpful. We'd appreciate that.
Okay, well, that sounds like, is anybody interested in partaking in a subcommittee for that?
I am.
Chris, okay. That sounds good. So we'll have a subcommittee for that, and then you guys will report back on that. I think that's important language for something of this nature, especially in some of these neighborhoods. Okay, well, thanks for that. I think we're ready to move on to our next item then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Running a little bit behind. And our next item is 2550 Treasure Drive.
Mr. Chair, I'll have to step down.
All right, thanks.
Martha DeGasis from Arcadia Studio, and we're presenting Phase 2 landscape plans for Samarkand Retirement Community. The scope of work is planting, irrigation, and we have a small pergola outside the health center for shelter during rainy weather, and a little garden wall in the same area to just create a small courtyard environment for the residents and using the health center while they wait for their van out in front. I'll go over that area.
Are these the same prints that you submitted?
I have an extra exhibit just as an overview to kind of give you a sense of the scale of the improvements and the portion of the campus that's being affected. So the campus being quite a bit larger than this, 12 acres, and this is the lower portion of the campus along Talent Road and Treasure Drive. And most people are probably familiar with that little park-like area on the corner there. So essentially we're just doing kind of a rehab of the landscaping, removing trees that are dying or growing against buildings or just kind of reached the end of their aesthetic life. So I'm going to go over first, I think, some of these tree removals just to kind of set everybody's mind at ease. So what we're taking out, there was a request from planning to provide some extra information on that. So I have a couple exhibits of that, so you can see the scope of the tree removal and replacement work. But this represents an exhibit that would show these sort of faded trees or the existing trees in the area that we'll be retaining, and the brighter trees or trees that we're adding. And then the removals, I'll show you an exhibit that we have that's in addition to the submitted drawings. They're at a smaller scale, so they're a little bit, oh my goodness, okay. This is, no wonder. So the, just going to kind of quickly go to this removal plan. And the trees with the, you have to kind of get close in here because it's 20 scale, but I'm showing the trees to be removed with the X's through them. And then I have a photo exhibit of the trees that we're removing. So I can quickly go over some of these if you want me to. Right. We've got, I don't know how exhaustive you want me to go into this. Kind of stay with it.
Just kind of, yeah.
Yeah. We've got a few trees on the corner of Talent and Treasure, and they're really nothing to write home about. To be too critical here, but we have a seedling loquat. We have a couple of elm trees that are just a very tiny canopy that have been struggling in this area. And a Phoenix canariensis palm that's just a seedling that we're taking out. We're adding in place of those some oak trees and some Arbutus marina trees. So we'll have some good canopy replaced in that area. Against this building called Northview here, we've got some very heavy podocarpus trees that have grown and enveloped some of the light posts in that area, and they're also obscuring the views from the upper floor windows. Many of the residents have complained about this, and they're just quite dense, and there's not much light going into those units. And just as some background, we had a neighborhood meeting and invited the surrounding neighbors of the Samarkand Neighborhood Association, and we had a resident meeting on the Samarkand, and there were no objections to any of these tree removals. Along this Northview building also there are some Catalina ironwood trees that have really reached a point where they're no longer particularly attractive. You can see from this small picture here that here's this Phoenix palm, that they're really not adding much to the aesthetics here of this building. In the upper area here there is a little seedling plum tree that's been allowed to grow into a pretty good-sized canopy. It's just a multi-trunk tree in this area. There's a couple of large eucalyptus and a very large oak in that area, so we're taking that tree out and replacing it with a western redbud. Here's another shot of these podocarpus trees that have become terribly dense along that building. Then as we this is a little bit out of sequence and geographically, so I'm just going to skip back through this. Along, bear with me if you will, along Treasure Drive there is a number of magnolia trees and albizia or mimosa trees. And the albizia trees are kind of dotted along in this area, and the magnolias are mostly concentrated in this section. The magnolias that are healthy we're leaving, but there are several that are planted in peculiar locations, like right up in a joining of a building where they're being crowded. This is an example here. And then there are several that are just quite tiny after many, many years of being in place, and so those we're taking out. And I'll go over the tree replacement along this edge in more detail, but we're putting olive trees, fruitless olive, and paper bark or melaleuca trees. So we're not going to be having any loss of canopy or screening in that area.
Are there any skyline or substantial size trees that you're removing?
We are removing one substantial tree, but I wouldn't really categorize it as a skyline. It's a Corycia tree. It's more on the interior of the area that we're working. There's I'll have to switch sheets. There's a chapel that's at the main entry drive to Samarkand, and behind it are 3 Corycia trees. And one is encroaching into a balcony of a residence balcony, and anyone who's familiar with the tree knows that it's a rather thorny tree. So I have a photograph of that tree here. So this is the tree, and you can see it's kind of pressing into this residence balcony. There will be 2 other Corycias remaining in that area, so we'll still have the effect of those trees. And then, in addition, there's a number of pines and jacarandas in these trees, so it's very densely planted right now. Some of the other removals would occur on this section of Treasure Drive, and just to kind of review the effect of that corner, it's quite dense. There were maybe a dozen Arbutus marina trees planted in between this area and this area, and they've been pruned. There's some more here. They've been pruned to conform to this very small planting area. This is a space where one tree would probably do. In addition, there's a number of pines along here. There's several, you can see them faintly on this tree removal plan, 3 large oaks here, or mid-size oaks, and then there's a number of evergreen pears planted, and then a set of these Arbutus marinas. And our thinking, we've seen the original landscape plan, it just seems that they were expecting the trees to be 10 to 12 feet in diameter, and they in reality grow 25 at least feet in diameter. So we're proposing to remove those and let the oak trees fill in and add a screening Arbutus tree up a little bit higher to this resident building here. So I think what I'm trying to stress is we have this just very dense planting. Here are these evergreen pear trees clasping this oak in this area, and we're just trying to free up those oaks so they can grow to their natural size and sort of clear out that density there. So I don't know how much more in detail you want me to go with all that, but
that's
it's
pretty good.
Just to give you a kind of an overview of what we're taking out, and these are, of course,
move on
available.
to,
The aesthetic side.
what we're proposing.
So, in terms of planting, now this is divided into several sheets, and you can see the key down here, but this is that sort of more public parkway area. It's got an existing lawn here, which we're going to be retaining most of. And what we plan to do here, there's a driveway going into a parking garage. The garage is quite visible from Talent, so we're adding some oak trees on either side of that driveway to kind of create a canopy over that wide drive. This is the area where we're removing some of these podocarpus trees, and we're planning just to add the Arbutus marina trees in this area, another one here and here and here. We're going to be presenting a sign program in the near future, and we're sort of trying to create a little bit of a just an arc of these strawberry trees around the sign area at the intersection of Talent, where it kind of jogs here and continues up to the corner. We're proposing in the ground plane some daylilies, Rhaphiolopus, because there's quite a few existing there, some Arctostaphylos or manzanitas, some kangaroo paw for a little bit of color, and then some bush marigold for a little more yellow color in there. So basically retaining the lawn shape and the lower ground plane with a few mid-sized shrubs, but just simplifying. There's quite a fruit salad of planting there currently, so we're just trying to make it a little brighter in color and a little simpler on the maintenance regimen.
Any hardscape changes? Or?
No hardscape changes in that area. This is across the drive. Again, a couple of oak trees being added, adding some redbud trees. There's some existing redbuds here and existing oaks, very large existing oak in this area. This is where we're removing that small fruit tree, adding redbud. And this plant palette along the edge here is going to be primarily native plants. So we have a variety of California native plants. They're Fremontodendron or flannel bush, sages, Arctostaphylos or manzanita, and then some Australian coria, some different Gregg sage, Douglas iris, euchera, that kind of thing. So we're going to have a native garden in this area.
What size are these oaks going?
The oaks we're proposing as 24s at this point. We could upsize, but we kind of like to be able to grow them on and control the form with maintenance. Along the Northview building here, there's some existing Japanese maples, so we want to add a few more in the bronze color just to kind of fill that lower canopy area where we're taking out those podocarpus. Ordinarily, we wouldn't use that tree. It's a little more thirsty, but we thought it would be a good complement to the several that are already there. And the planting along the north side there's some existing camellias and that sort of thing, and ferns, so we're just adding some sun camellia there and that kind of planting, some agapanthus in this area. And existing lawn will be retained. All the irrigation will be changed out from spray to drip, except in the lawn areas where we'll be converting the existing low efficiency irrigation heads to high efficiency heads. And at this area here, we kind of skip to a central area of the project that's not visible to the public or from public streets. But here we've got, we have an existing lawn in this area. There was a lawn here, but we're proposing to replace it with more drought-tolerant shrubs. And these clouded areas represent existing shrubbery that we're going to protect. Tree additions on this plan, we're planning to add a sweet shade or a hymenosperm tree between some buildings here where there is no tree. And along this edge there's there's 4 cassia or gold medallion trees that 2 are quite nice, but 2 are overgrown and just have very poor structure, so we'd like to take those out, and we're just adding again the red bud in this area. The slope planting here is quite sparse, so we're just adding Pittosporum tobira variegata for some massing along that slope. And against the building, this Magnolia West building, there's some Bauhinia trees that I can show you a picture of. They've become quite tall, and they're not really doing anything for the building or for shading. So we're going to replace those with Queensland umbrella trees in 3 locations along there. And we're just adding a citrus tree for the residents in this area, and then another citrus here, adding 1 more sweet shade in this planter where there is none, and another sweet shade in that corner. We return on this sheet to the frontage along Treasure Drive, and this is a location where we're taking out or proposing to take out a few trees. So along this area, we're removing some plum trees that have been very badly pruned, and they're really just little lollipops at this point. So what we're planning to add along there are Melaleuca quinquenervia or leucodendra. It's the paperbark tree, and it grows nice and tall. We think that'll be a good screen for this very tall building here, where right now there's just some stubbed purple leaf plums. There's a large oak tree in this sort of niche here that's not visible because it's hidden by a liquid ambar tree, a pine tree, a bottle brush tree, and just some shrubbery and so on. So we're proposing to remove the liquid ambar tree, leave the pine tree, which is quite tall, skyline tree, let the oak have a little breathing room, take out the callistemon or bottle brush because they were planted just to screen a backflow preventer there, and they've grown rather tall and bushy. And so we're adding redbud under the canopy of this larger oak tree here. And then as we come to this section, again, we're removing more of these purple leaf plums, but we're adding fruitless olives, 4 in this location. And in the background here, there's a number of tall pine trees and so on. So I thought it would be nice to have a little lower canopy in that area. Shrubbery through here, we've just got, this is quite shady again with these pine trees, so we have some Chinese fringe flower and some native ferns and that sort of thing. Again, the manzanita through here. As we transition around the bus stop along Treasure Drive, we go to, again, back to the paperbark trees because that'll create a nice tall backdrop. There's 2 large existing eucalyptus trees and the street frontage here at the bus stop. So these will be more or less an understory to those trees. Again, against this taller building, we just saw the courtyard inside of, I've got some more sweet shade trees, and those would replace the Lionothamnus or Catalina ironwood that we're removing. Again, along Treasure Drive, and then this is a sort of a main driveway that goes to the health center. We're protecting all the trees, which are palm trees and maytens trees along this edge here. But this is an area where we're removing some magnolia trees and again replacing with the paperbark tree and an olive tree. This olive tree will screen the entry to the Smith Health Center garage that's now quite visible with a little stunted magnolia tree. Along this area there's 2 existing oaks. One's a cork oak and one is a coast live oak. And then next to them we're planting more of the Melaleuca and some more of the pittospore, or we've got some leptospermum for an understory there. There's an interior courtyard that's associated with the health center, and right now there's 3 bauhinia trees that are planted in very tiny planting pockets. They're lifting the pavement. So we're going to remove those and put in some Lagerstromia, dwarf Lagerstromia trees there. And there's another courtyard, interior courtyard, that has several Melaleuca trees close to one another. One is breaking the paving. We're taking that one out, but not replacing it. There's one right next to it. And there's a coral tree in a restricted planter in the middle of this small courtyard, and that we're planning to take out and cover with paving because it's hard to walk in there. This is the area at the corner of the entry drive to the project. This is an existing lawn area that will retain. The neighbors seem to like to use that. And this is that location that's so densely planted with all the pear trees, but we're just planning to let these 4 coast live oaks to remain. And then you can see here there's several cluster of pine trees through that area. So there's quite a bit of tree canopy in there. So there's also a hedge right here of Prunus caroliniana. We'd like to take that out and put a lower growing, but allow to grow to about 7 foot tall, the Pittosporum Tobira variegata there, just to create a lower screen there. Right now it's just a wall of greenery. The slope right now has red fescue and a variety of plants, and we're just going to plant ceanothus along there, so it'll be more drought tolerant. And then this planting will remain. The only other removal we have in this area, again, that Corycia that I discussed that's interfering with the balcony. And we're planting 2 more lagerstromias or crepe myrtles in this area. There's a couple of jacarandas through here too. And then in this small planting area adjacent to a walkway, there's a Leuphostomon or Tristania tree that is in about a 2 or 3 foot planter, and it's going to start breaking the paving, so we'd like to remove that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
So
I think
it's
that was very thorough.
what I'll show you on the layout sheet is this little area by the health center that we're putting a pergola with a solid roof in order to create some shelter there. So we'll do that. Sorry for the shoes. Okay, it's very small. It's just about 5 by 15 foot little pergola here, and there's a large one here. So the health center right now has a set of columns that support a little roof extension here, and what we want to do, here's the roof and an elevation, what we want to do is just add a wood pergola outside of that existing roof overhang, and we do have a picture of it in there that we can refer to if you'd like to. So it's just 8 by 8 columns and an 8 by 10 beam, and then the purlins are 4 by 6. And then on top would be the built-up roofing. So it's very similar to what they have in their carports. And so we're just trying to create a bit of shelter there for the residents. In addition, we're going to have a little low 5 foot high garden wall that would just partially enclose the space. And right now they just have a walkway coming out to the driveway here, and then a couple little lawn panels. So we just want to create this little garden wall, and I see that we've dropped some line work here. I'll just go like that. Create this little garden wall in order to just give a little protection. They have a lot of deliveries coming in and out of this driveway, so they're just trying to create a little better atmosphere for the residents there while they're waiting for their bus. And then we've got a set of two 3-foot leaves for a 6 foot wide little wrought iron gate there.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. At this time, I'd have to ask if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this project. Seeing no one step forward. Tony, do we have any letters? No? All right. Comments from the board?
Questions?
Questions from the board? Questions?
On LP1, you were showing some strawberry trees adjacent to some sidewalks, and I had a concern about the residents. I know that's really hilly in the neighborhood, and strawberry trees, fruits are pretty slippery.
Yeah, so the trees will be in a pretty broad planting area through there, so I don't think that they're going to drop their fruit. We've got cotoneaster underneath the tree canopy too. I don't think they'll have fruit drop on the sidewalk per se. So It does slope a bit there. You're absolutely correct about that. But we do have a little bit of an overhang here, but I don't think that we can even move that back a little bit. I don't think we're going to get drop on the sidewalk. It's a good consideration, though.
That's it.
Yeah.
I guess I have two questions. When was the original planting done, or is this a mishmash of over the years?
It's been done over probably a 40-year period. Some of the most recent planting on the corner by the chapel, I think, was done about, I'm going to say, 10 years ago, about like that, and that's probably the most recent.
Okay, and you're also switching over to gray water?
Yeah, it's part of the project is we have reclaimed or recycled water on the corner at the park, but we're changing everything over to
So all the
reclaimed.
irrigation heads for the lawn will be switched out?
Yes.
Okay. And then as far as that the Carizia tree, have you looked into pruning that area up? It's a nice full sculptural tree. I'm just wondering if there's a way to save that with pruning as opposed to just pulling it out.
Well, we can certainly look at it. I think that a couple of these major branches would definitely be coming off,
Okay.
and it.
Well, something to think about.
Yeah, we can consider that. I think it would be lifted up pretty severely. But,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, comments?
I just have one comment that the structural connections at the post to beam and post to base, they either be hidden or decorative to match.
Okay.
And then as far as landscape comments, I mean, it's sort of a lot to digest, and it looks like you did a very thorough job, and, I don't know that I have real specific comments, so it'd be nice to have some more time to look over it, I guess. I don't know where we are in the process here. It's a new item, so
It's a new yeah.
can we take action today as far as a preliminary and bring it back to
Consent?
consent, because it'd be good to have some time to study it, but it looks like you did a good job, and you're competent professionals, so we'll take a closer look at it, I think, at consent, I would
Okay.
say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the Turosa speciosus should probably be trimmed. It's a beautiful tree. It has lovely pink hibiscus-looking flowers, and I'm sure the residents enjoy that. But in general, it has quite an eclectic planting, I'd have to say. The trees, they're all over the place, but I think you know what's going on, and much more so I think I'd leave that up to consent.
Yeah, I mean, based on the presentation, doing a lot of unification of the planting and
That's what we're trying
cutting
to
out
do,
some of
yeah.
the, unshapely trees that have probably been hacked over time. So looks like you're in the, going in the right direction.
So can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion. For preliminary project design approval with 2-week continuance to the consent calendar. With the following comments, consider moving the strawberry trees further away from the walkways. That the structural connections at the post base and the post beam be either hidden or decorative to match the architecture. That's it.
You want to do 1 week? Or do you want, Martha, do you want to do 1 week?
Yes, please.
One
You-
week and
Consent is
10
every week.
minutes.
Every week, okay, 1 week.
Yeah.
Neat.
And I guess we could add that further study of the landscape design will be had at consent calendar level.
Okay. Can I get a seconder for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
All right.
I thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Very concise.
Take a cupcake, Martha. Take a cupcake.
bring Serge in here if you want to. You can bring Serge in here.
I didn't want it to close. That way you can be sure that he won't bark.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that? He'll be all right. He's a dog.
Those look dangerous, though. This fight. Yep.
Surge crash.
All right.
Brian Cornell, Phil Suding. We are here with 1255 Coast Village Road for in-progress review for all of you, which we said we were going to do. Since we were last here, I wanted to point out a few things that I think we need your comments on for staff. That'll probably end up being substantial conformity determinations. Let me just go straight to the elevations to do that. The first thing in the process of finalizing the roofs and creating a little bit more diversity along Coast Village Road, we do have a maximum height now of 29 foot 7 inches as opposed to 28 feet. And we hope that you all find that to be reasonable. Just as a little reminder, because I think it shows up here, the height limit in this zone is 45 feet. So we really did that in order to get a little more articulation between these roofs, which if you look at the roof plan here, basically it's really happening with this roof element right here to get it above this roof. So that's the first thing. And as long as I'm on the roof plan, the second thing is that based on our client's desires and a lot of input that he is getting from real estate agents, we are proposing to put residential elevators in these residential units, which would go up to the roofs. And what that results in are these elements that you can probably see best in the rear elevation. This is that back south elevation, so you can see one of them here and one of them here. We also have rooftop fireplaces up here, which you can kind of begin to see in this element. So these become, roof appendages, which I actually think kind of gives it a nice little playful appearance and really is only going to be visible from probably for the residents only. If we look at the elevation along Coast Village Circle, which would be this one, you can kind of get a sense that those elements are pretty far back, and they definitely aren't going to be visible from Coast Village Road. So I know that planning staff wants your comments on that. Other than that, just a few things to highlight, and I won't go into too much. We do have details if you're interested in me going through them. But what we want is to create a nice, a reasonably authentic approach to these storefronts. So, for instance, at this storefront here, we are proposing to recess. Let me go to the floor plan. We're proposing to recess museum glass back behind an arcade with columns so that we really get the sense that that's a different storefront from the rest of these. This particular building we want to treat with wood storefronts. This one is going to be aluminum, and then these also we propose to be wood storefronts so that we really get the sense of what's happening right now there along Coast Village Road, that
these are, buildings that have kind of happened over time. If you recall, this sort of Monterey balcony element, which we actually had to get a modification for, we're proposing that be sort of in the spirit of Coast Village Road, and are going to paint that out. So it's not going to be stained wood. It's going to be actually painted wood, which has a really kind of nice look and is typical there on Coast Village Road. And I think that's more or less what we've got. Again, you can see that we've developed, a few more details architecturally, but other than that, it's pretty much the project that you reviewed at design approval. And Phil, do you have some points you want to make relative to landscaping?
So the last time we were here, we had talked about the SCE transformer and gas meters. The gas meters have moved into the garage, so you won't see those at all. The transformer has to be where it is. We asked if we could move it into the garage. It can't go into the garage. So what I am proposing is some taller shrubs, the Kalanchoe barrensis, which is a felt plant, en masse around the transformer to help screen that. And you asked also for a larger tree against the elevation of that building, so we are proposing to do a Lofostum, a Brisbane box, a little bit taller than the Tababuya. We've narrowed down the plant palette to what we intend on doing, and it's mostly a succulent Mediterranean palette. With the exception of maybe this hedge, which is either going to be boxwood, as it is what we've proposed now, or the Myrcene africana. In through the project here, we have a variety of different pots, and I'll come back to you with cut sheets on those or pictures of those, and those will be mostly colorful glazed clay pots. I think
we also, there's a condition for additional bike parking at street level. It actually called out to be uncovered, but we put a couple of little bikes parking in this covered area underneath these exterior stairs. We haven't shown any on the street, but I think we do want to probably have a couple of locations on the sidewalk itself as well. Sorry.
And I believe Mr. Gilliland wanted to get a better sense of how we were going to fit this large Monterey cypress in that corner there. And I'm sorry, I only brought one copy, but what will happen, this is the garage below. The paving will come right up to the planter. The box will fit, it won't fit in the planter. So while the project is being built, we'll side box it within the box so that we can kind of constrain its roots a little bit more so that we can fit it into this planter. But this is a diagram to show that it does go down to Mother Earth, and it will be planted in the ground. So the root ball will drop below the footing of that raised wall and then start to grow into Mother Earth in that location.
Phil, as I look at that, let me ask you a question. I mean, it seems like we could theoretically gain a little bit extra space by trying to radius that.
Maybe, yeah.
At that point, which would help in that constrained condition.
This dimension here is about 4.5 feet, so I took the cross section looking this way. That's about 3.5 feet there. But yeah, we could get a little bit more room, would help.
Did you have any details of the elevator tower or the?
Right now, I don't think we do have details of that, but frankly, what we want to do is just keep those very simple. We are going to, they would have a similar kind of radius at the eave conditions, so they would be going to our details. If I've got So this is probably the closest thing I've got, but it would be a similar kind of a flared eave condition, and then those would be hip roofs that we've kept at a low slope, just to try to minimize.
And what was the total height of that? You said 29?
Well, the revised height from the 28 feet is 29'7", so we're adding 19 inches in that previous condition, which was our highest elevation point. Now, the elevator towers would exceed that, but those would be, all of these things would be considered architectural appendages.
And what's the distance of these?
Let's see if we see that anywhere in the plan, Gary. They may show on the enlarged plans also. Let's see. Do we have a scale? I apologize for not having dimensions.
Okay, so these are the...
Yeah, so that's the footprint of those elements. So
about 7'6" or something. Okay, 8 feet.
Here you go.
Oh, here we go.
Thank you. Oh, there it is. Gosh, somebody's prepared. So 1/4 inch, so 5.5 at the most, right? By 5.
Okay.
So those are small residential elevators.
All right. Is that the end of your presentation?
I'll be happy to answer questions.
Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this project? Serge? Seeing no one, I'll bring it to the board for questions. Keith? Stephanie, questions?
I'm a little confused about the section that you drew. So you're suggesting that the tree roots go down to here?
Correct. This will also be soil, planting mix in there.
What size box is that, Phil?
72 inch.
That's okay for the tree?
Is that a taproot type tree?
Definitely. Definitely. I've talked to growers, and they said that shouldn't be any problem. A lot of times when they're in the nursery, they end up escaping the box, and they go down through the bottom of the box. So I know that tree will do that.
Kurt?
Brian, is there any other differentiation between storefronts other than the window type?
Well, just for instance, we'll have a column supporting these arches. We're obviously doing different shapes to these storefronts.
Yeah.
And I think you can see from the plan the kind of depth that we're anticipating to build into the storefronts.
Yeah.
So, this one obviously has the wrought iron railing. We also have different eave conditions. So this building obviously has a wood eave condition, whereas this building has that flared eave. We do have rafter tails that are called out for this building. So we're and you can see on the details, we're mixing up the rafter tail. Let me just show you that real quick. The rafter tails are going to have slightly different shapes to them. If I can find it. So these are the 3 rafter tail shapes that we are proposing, and this is showing that condition particularly at the eave of the balcony. This was more that flared condition. Sorry. This was more the flared condition that I was talking about with the eave.
Okay. How about color? You thinking there should be color difference or not?
I've always thought of this project as being white. If I did color, my inclination would be to not do it at the storefronts as much as putting color back at the residential units, just to maybe darken them a little bit and settle them back. I'd be, welcome to your thoughts on that, because it's always a topic of disagreement in our office. But I just like the idea of this being kept, simple and white.
don't have any other questions.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple minor questions. The ramp out front, was that always there?
The ramp along Coast Village Circle?
Oh, yeah, no, he's talking about this ramp here.
Yeah, that was always there.
Okay, and it's necessary because you have steps just to the east of that, and
Yeah, I
you
mean,
don't have
if you look at the survey, it's necessary because we're matching.
No, I think I had two.
Okay. We're matching grade at Coast Village Road here, and there's kind of a dip at this particular point. So it's just enough to where we need to get that ramp and add those couple of steps.
Okay. Let's see, the green screen at the south side, is there a detail that I'm missing somewhere for that, Phil?
No, there's no detail yet, but we can certainly provide a detail.
Okay, and that will be some sort of wire mesh?
Wire mesh, I'm not sure it will be the green screen brand, but it will most likely be a wire mesh that a twining vine can attach itself to.
And with the approximate height?
What is the approximate height of that?
I may need that scale again. No, it shows up on the rear elevation best, probably. So, I actually don't, this is not drawn right because the intent is to have it come up to guardrail height only, which is actually...
From the walkway outside the units.
Well, yeah, exactly, off of that. So that screen is going to be 7 feet.
I think that's all I have for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I appreciate the kind of thorough look here, and I think the changes in the height are not an aesthetic issue.
Did Serge get enough to eat that day?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I think that's not a problem. Appreciate the continued kind of articulation of the separate storefronts. I think I would rather see the differentiation in color between the uses, like you suggested, Brian, rather than kind of a Disneyland thing of the different storefronts being different colors. So, yeah, I think it's shaping up nicely. I appreciate the look at the planter for that one tree. So, look forward to the further development.
Stephanie?
I don't have a problem with the height increase, and I don't have a problem with any of the changes that the elevators that they're proposing either. And I appreciate the work that you did to try to screen the transformer. I'm a little concerned about the different storefront appearances, and I'll look forward to seeing more definition on that from you guys in the future, but being sold on that idea.
Versus detailing it the same?
No, like if it's wood, is it clad, is it frameless glass, is you're not sure where it was going to be.
No, I'm sorry. This one is definitely the frameless glass where it's behind these arches. So those arches actually float and the glass is back and there's no frame here. These would be aluminum storefront. This one and this one would be wood.
Yeah.
So that's at least what we have planned right now, is that these two would be the painted wood and we differentiate with aluminum here and then the frameless
What about
there.
steel?
Well, steel would be, I mean, in lieu of aluminum, or as another option.
Or wood? The wood, I guess, I'm a little concerned with on that corner,
Okay,
being exposed to the sun.
okay. As am I.
Yeah.
Okay. Steel's an option to consider. Okay.
Kurt? No comments?
Okay. I just had a few, I think, minor comments. I guess that cypress tree, just so I'm clear, we're basically taking a 72-inch box and trimming it down to like a 3.5 to fit in a 3.5-foot planter
We will be side boxing it
within the current
within the
box.
box before it goes into the ground.
Okay.
So, yeah, we'll be kind of squeezing a 72-inch box into a, and, you know, if Brian and I look at that a little bit closer, we may be able to squeeze out another foot of the, for the planter. The way I calculate it, there's only really going to be about a foot taken off of each side, not necessarily all four sides, so it'd just be two sides.
Okay. Does that have to be a raised planter in that location?
And that's a good question, because these raised planters have really been a function of having to get the drainage when it's over the podium. And as far as the Janines, I think originally we may have thought of it as a barrier for the Janines deck, but we're in ongoing discussions on this, and their preference right now is actually to pour that, instead of rebuilding it as a raised deck, to pour it as a slab flush with the sidewalk, in which case then that raised planter has a lot less necessity. So
Sort of ongoing.
I think I actually think it is possible that
Good question, yeah.
we could do away. I just wanted to look at one more thing as far as the footprint of the garage, which I'm pretty sure we show.
I showed him my plan if you want to go to mine.
Yeah, if you've got it, that would be great.
It's pretty evident on mine.
Yeah, so really it's just that little piece and that little piece that is of issue. So assuming that Penfield and Smithville is not bringing rainwater into this planter, which I don't think they are, and, it would require us to cut that back a little bit, but then this could just be in the ground.
Although I do remember when we were looking at that raised planter, trying not to get into discussion, I'm sorry, but it sort of did help frame that building and that storefront there.
Yeah.
Because it kind of matched that.
You have that theme going across.
Exactly,
I'd be totally
yeah,
okay
I don't
with
think that's I mean, it's a handsome building
So
anyway.
that
It
may
doesn't
be
need that.
that may be a
It'd be-
really good call.
It'd be better for the arcade if this was lower. I think
It's
the
only
arcade would look better.
about 18 inches tall. It's not very tall.
I mean,
Right.
the fact that we've got the advantage of the ground there, I
Yeah.
actually think it's a good suggestion.
yeah, we'll look at it.
Okay. And then the transformer, I think I sort of missed that discussion as I was immersed in your plan here, but the screening for that, does that need to be left open?
It does.
Facing the Coast Village Circle?
Correct.
Okay. But you have it screened from both sides?
Right, and so we're proposing just a low kind of succulent ground cover in front of it, so at least there's some planting.
Right, okay.
It's not just bare or right against the back of the sidewalk.
And I guess my only other comment would be to consider increasing the box sizes for some of the trees that are on the outer edges.
You want something bigger than 72? No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
No, I think you have 24s for the remainder.
Okay.
Like for the crepe myrtles and the
Okay.
tababuyas, just because some of them are right next to the sidewalk. It might be nice to get a little higher canopy,
Okay.
so we're not. But that's about it. I think it looks really good. You have a lot of softened up areas, especially all the pots, and it's a very big challenge on top of a parking garage, basically, to make it look live enough. But it seems successful to me.
Thank you.
That's it.
All right, thank you. My only comments would be, I don't think the height is a problem. I really don't think the elevators are an issue. I would, however, like to see perhaps, let's go to the elevation. Perhaps on the elevators, and I know you don't have them detailed out yet, but so that they aren't too redundant, and we've got different building frontages and so forth, and so that we don't see the same. And I know that we won't particularly see them from Coast Village. We may see them across the street from Molly's or something like that.
So treat one a little different than the other, just
Perhaps,
like we're
especially where they're next to each other.
which is what we're doing with the chimneys at those rooftops. We're treating them
Right.
differently. So
my
okay.
suggestion would be to try and treat one a little
Okay.
different. Okay, looking for a motion.
Can we continue this to final, or and do I need to submit 2 weeks in it? What does it work as far as submittal then for final?
And can final be on consent?
Yeah, the ABR can continue this to consent. I don't know what level of substantial conformance determination we're talking about, but you've got support here from the ABR, and they'll add those comments to their motion, and staff will have to figure out what level of substantial conformance it requires. So that should be taken care of before you return for final. But if the ABR is okay with it coming back to consent, we can do that.
So could we be optimistic and try to continue for 2 weeks to final, and then if Suzanne can't do that, we'd move it?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, that's what I'd like to do, at least.
Any questions on that?
Do we have the PC resolution? Do we need to look at that? We've already got
Yeah, that was part of design
Project design.
approval.
All right.
The one thing that you haven't done is we do have to have the detail for the temporary sound wall, which is along Janine's. So we still have to do that.
And all of the items on the motion from the 4/16 hearing was talked about, right? The lowering the height of the sandstone wall on Coast Village Circle.
Yes, we did that. That's on your elevations.
Okay. All right. Motion?
Chair, I'll take a stab at a motion. This would be a 2-week continuance back to full board for final approval with the following comments. Board finds the change in building height has no aesthetic impact. Consider some architectural variation in the elevator towers. Consider eliminating the raised planter at the cypress tree and provide the sound wall detail as requested.
Second? Second. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Opposed?
Thanks, guys.
Motion carried.
Thank you for
Moving on, our next item. 1198 Coast Village Road.
He's got my scale. Brian, you have my scale. Did you get my scale back?
Here it is.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon. State your name for the record.
And Josh Monroy from Earth Form Design.
All right. And, all right.
Thank you.
All right. Can you explain your changes?
Yeah, there was a couple comments last time regarding the trash enclosure, the existing trash enclosure, if it was ADA compliant. So we looked into it, we're in contact with the building department, and for now we'd like to leave it where it is, add a new gate and make it, the gate hardware and the door to be ADA compliant. That's where we are right now. It may change, but that's where we'd like to try to keep it. The other thing was to make sure that the screening on top of the building was sufficient for the ventilation. And so I did a little quick kitchen layout and ran some numbers on that with the company, and we have enough space to hide the makeup air and everything. And that hasn't changed. That was the same as last time. So basically we're adding this new section here, and we're reducing the size of the existing one for the makeup air. And then there was some discussion on the new pizza oven stack. Mm-hmm. It was wood before, and I just want to go up with a simple flue pipe that we could paint out dark to match the roof.
Okay.
And I think the other thing was the cypress tree,
Right.
which Josh can probably spell out a little better.
Yeah, so the landscape plan is essentially the same as the last time it was presented, with the exception of a new cypress tree being introduced. There's one to be removed on the property, and so we'll be replacing that with a large 36-inch box Monterey cypress, which is located here. Other than that, the landscape is the same from the previous review.
Okay, great. Conclude your presentation.
Yeah, I think basically too, there was a lot of nice screening around this existing trash enclosure to try to really minimize the impact of that.
Okay. Okay, is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this project? Seeing no one step forward, bring it to the board for questions.
No questions.
Stephanie? Kurt?
I was just looking at the ridge detail. It's just you haven't shown the roofing on it. That's
Oh, yeah, it was just matching. I got it on the elevation just to match the
Okay.
existing.
Okay.
It's a composition.
oh, it is?
Yeah.
Huh. For some reason, I thought it was shingles. Okay.
Chris?
I guess the only question I have is, within the right-of-way, is there a maximum height requirement or limit for the planting in this section?
I think the rule is 18 inches in that area for parkways.
You're talking initially. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
I don't think we can go right away live on the planning here.
Well, I think this is showing the property line right here.
Yeah.
Well,
right away.
Yeah, the right of way is. This is the right of way right here, and then that's the setback line. So the right of way basically almost looks to the.
Okay, so this section through here may have a limit on the height of planting. Okay, so I guess I'll swing that right into a comment just to take a closer look at that and then verify whether or not that tree can be placed there also, that cypress. That's it.
Okay. Comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my only comment is, appreciate the little tweaks, and I think it's probably ready for final on consent when the applicant's ready.
Just one question, is the lighting matching something that's existing?
It's new. There really isn't really anything there, and I thought that kind of worked well with the style. There's just actually two locations for that light.
Oh, okay. Are those on the interior patio or on the outside?
Outside, right there, and then there's one by the other door on the
Where is that at?
on the west.
What are we talking about?
Actually, I didn't show it on the elevation, but there'll be need to get some sort of a light here, and then I have a light. One more sheet here. Light right here, which will be just check out lighting.
Okay, and this is a down light right
Correct.
here?
Mm-hmm. It's in a recess.
This is the Coast Village Road elevation?
This is the parking lot on the...
This is the parking lot elevation, and then is there any on Coast Village Road?
No, there's not.
Okay.
It's clean.
Yeah. Okay. Chris, any questions? I mean, any comments?
No, not really. I'm just looking at that right-of-way comment that I just made and hoping that's not the case because we're going to end up with a very basic landscape along there. So hopefully they'll allow us to plant some larger...
If the right-of-way is an issue, could we move that cypress somewhere inside that line?
It gets pretty close to the structure.
Yeah.
We'll have to study maybe another location possibly.
It might be if we do it here.
Yeah.
Even if we have to maybe rearrange this a little bit.
Sure.
And it's possible the tree may be allowed, but the understory may have to be lower. So it would just be something to check into. And when they come back for final, they should have that information.
Yep.
It's a little closer to this one, but...
Yeah. Okay. Looking for a motion then?
Mr. Chair, first ask the applicants, would you like a 2-week continuance for final, or 1 week, or
1 week.
1 week? Okay, so yeah, this would be a 1 week continuance to the consent for final approval with the following comment: verify the regulatory requirements for the height of the planting in the parkway area at the corner.
All right. Second?
Second. Second.
Second, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the chimney change.
Yeah, I think it looks a lot better. It's not so bulky, too.
It's
You
cheaper.
got a little treat there?
Yeah. Please do. Help.
I might take them all. Okay.
Okay, next item, 635 Olive Street.
No one? They were? I haven't seen them.
We're back on schedule.
How do we do that?
We were way behind.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not here for another 3 minutes.
Chris there. Cupcakes. Must be someone's birthday.
They're all the right colors.
Yeah, I think it's in here, but of course, I always like to bring the color.
Welcome. You state your name for the record.
Michael Porter. I'm the architect representing the owner, Stephanie Dotson.
Aaron Sherson. I'm another architect. I work for Michael Porter.
Robert Adams, landscape architect.
And Kim True, landscape architect.
Great. Okay. Last time you were here, we asked you to provide some more extensive neighborhood content documentations.
Right. There were 7 items that you asked us to address, including giving you an aerial, composite elevations, photos, and there were some other sort of architectural comments, which I'll kind of walk you through. Were all of you here at the last meeting? Yeah. So, are you familiar with the site? We are at the corner of Ortega and Olive.
Sorry, I was here.
Okay.
Yeah, you made the motion.
So, this is the building siting is Olive Ortega. Building sits back on the corner at the back edge of the property with the former pot clinic and China Bowl adjacent. These are the photographs that we sent to you the last time. We have some additional ones that we can run through for you for the context, both architectural context and kind of scale context. And while we did have an aerial for you, I brought a bigger one so that we can talk about the site context and scale. So, Ortega, Olive, our site. China Bowl, the Pot Clinic, another residence, Tile Co., another multifamily residence, and this is Transition House. Residence, and then a small scale commercial building, another residence, commercial building, another small residence, and the former Hayward site, and Arnoldi's. So I did kind of a preliminary figure ground for you, so you could see kind of the footprint of our building relative to the other footprints, and then you can see the larger context with the bus yard, the city yard, some additional city yard. Work goes on in here. And slide that over. I have another aerial if you want to. You're okay?
Did you have any photo documentation of the buildings?
We do.
Okay.
And then I also did street elevations for you. So here, there's 635 Olive here, 635 Olive here, so you can kind of overlay them with the residence, the former Pot Clinic, another residence, and then Tile Co. Residence, Transition House, and then here's our proposed structure, Ortega, which has a 60-foot right-of-way, and then the multifamily projects that are adjacent. And then looking down Ortega Street, we have our proposal, Olive, single-story residence with a two-story piece attached to the back, the China Bowl, and the transition house. There's an alleyway, and then the city yard. So we can walk you through some. We can send one down your way.
Just put it right here, and the cameraman might be able to get them.
So, existing house. And property across more of the existing house. So, here is our residence currently. This is the former Hot Clinic property up for sale. China Bowl. Transition house. And then this starts our kind of strip down the block from transition house. It's a multifamily residence that's here. Talco. The other residence, the pot clinic, in the beginning of our structure, and then Ortega, and then the multifamily structures. This is a clubhouse, I believe, not a dwelling unit. And that begins at the two-story portion of that. And then this is adjacent to the city yard. And then it's that single-story structure. And then our structure is behind the hedge. China Bowl. And a transition house with the alley and the city yard adjacent. Then kind of starting across on the other side, we have that single-story residence. Then this is the graphics building that's concrete block. Residence. Another residence. That's the back end of one of the multifamily structures, transition house, Talco, and that just kind of starts the sequencing again. There was some discussion at our previous meeting about context, and the architectural context is kind of all over the map. So this is the back end of the transition house that abuts the China Bowl. That's the commercial structure, so that's concrete block. There's also a concrete block wall. That's the back end of the transition house that you can see from the street. And that's back behind Talco. There's another long flat wall adjacent to the commercial building and the former Hayward structure. Wall on across the street from Arnoldi's on the transition house. And then there's another tall wall behind Hayward's, another block wall on the property line adjacent to Hayward's and Arnoldi's in their bocce ball yard. And these are just some of the side street commercial buildings also made out of block. one of my favorite buildings in Santa Barbara, the Kyoto Townhouse. And then the two sort of repair buildings that are adjacent to the townhouse further down on Olive that are block buildings as well on the PL. And that is the radio building. And that's another block wall. Tileco is the building here. And then that's the block wall that separates that from the multifamily structure adjacent.
You know how tall that is, that wall?
Tileco is somewhere in the neighborhood of 34 to 35 feet tall to the top end of it. And the first, so there's like a half of there's about 6 feet of plate down, another 6. So I would say that's at 24, some of it, 24 plus. And that's the back side of that wall. And then what I was saying was 24 was here, and then you can see where it steps up along the alleyway in the back. And that's the back part of it. And then the sort of the nicer elevation and along the alley of Transition House, and where it abuts the other part of Transition House. And then that's the other Muni building down the block that has no penetrations on the elevation on the public street. So that's context, kind of overview of the project. The last time we were here, the building was set at 40 feet to the top edge of the parapet up on the deck. I'll use these. And now we've reduced the building height to that point, which is the top of the parapet, to 33 feet 1 inch. So we've reduced 7.5 feet roughly. On the side adjacent to the China Bowl, we've kind of carved out some of the mass because we have a staircase that goes up the side. And if some of you recall, since this is CM, the setbacks are 0 all the way around, and the height limit is 60 feet. Our building materials, we alter the building materials from perforated cont'd steel to cont'd steel 14-inch wide sheets in kind of a 7 and 8 foot pattern that we're using as a rain screen or scrim in front of the building on the Olive Street and the Ortega Street sides. And then the most of the building that's set behind it is set in stucco, which is a heavy tunnel dash in a gray tone. And we've brought our material samples along with us, which were asked for before. We adjusted some of our window placements. That is that. So this is a wine glass green entry here. This is our trim piece around the windows, glass, stucco color, and then the cont'd material that's set up in the rain screen pattern.
You said it's perforated, or?
It's not perforated, it's solid.
Okay.
So it reads as planks, as in wood planks.
Will you be using different material on that?
No, it's a modeled look, and so we try to replicate that.
Okay.
On this elevation off of Ortega, we have a window behind the screen, and so part of the screen is there to break up the facade as well as set up a rain screen condition so that we have air and ventilation that pass through it, as well as breaking down the heat gain on the west side in particular.
This material?
That's all concrete block.
Okay.
So the maximum height there is 31 and some change. And then that's at that point, and we step down a couple of times to, and we've got some elevation and relief set up on this.
Did you provide some more information on floor-to-floor plate heights?
We did.
On the plan?
On our sections, we have a basement, and that basement height is 9 feet. Then the main floor working area is 17. I have a mezzanine with 8, so I've got a garage and a mezzanine, 8 and 8. And then 9 up on the living area, and a section of this is 10'4" in this zone further back towards the corner. Stepping through the floor plans, and in particular the roof plan, we have the stairs that come up to the roof deck, and then we have planters and green roof over an elevated section here, and planters adjacent to the China Bowl side. And this is in plan where that the void in the block is. The rest of it is pretty self-explanatory. We did set up the garage, and we've had a fairly long and exhaustive discussion with Waste Management about getting rid of how we handle trash and waste, in particularly when grapes are being processed. And so we've located a zone for them for that inside this garage because it's oversized and we can only use this for one car. So that trash is hidden back in there. I'll have Robert walk through some of the landscape issues.
Okay, so basically, Ortega Street, Olive Street, and here's a very nice existing street tree olive here. There is an existing camphor tree here that probably is going to have to go, so we want to get on the corner another olive tree, fruitless olive. Okay, and here is the low wall in front dividing the sidewalk from the parking area. And so anyway, you enter through here, obviously, and then we're going to have permeable jointing with a permeable grout, which is actually the City of Santa Barbara stormwater. People like this grout. Water can flow through it at way more than the minimum rates. So this would be flat. You can move in and out. This is the ADA access space. And here's the path of travel here. Against here is a fence, and we're going to use like a grapevine on that, being that has a good habit. What is it? Rogers Red. Rogers Red on here, and then this also is a rain garden through here, so we capture some of the stormwater here. In front of the wall, we have some interesting, very drought-tolerant plantings. We have Senecio ground cover, which is the blue ice plant, Chris knows, mixed with different materials. And over here is more of a rain garden. We're going to address the neglected parkway with a low-growing, I think we were thinking about Cecilaria, maybe with some blue oak grass around the tree well of this existing olive. And over here, we're keeping this high. This is going to be the low point. We're going to capture and clean stormwater here and in here. Over here's the shady side, and I want to point out we have two Stenocarpus trees. The firewheel tree. It's let's see, we have a nice picture of that. It's really kind of a narrow, not super tall, but it'll get about maybe 24 to 28 feet tall. Pretty narrow tree, but it really picks up some of the colors and is evergreen, and it is a nice approach for, we think, kind of softening this area right here. We have some shade-tolerant plantings on this north side down here as you approach in here. And then we go to the roof deck. Well, we like to, on this elevated portion, we want to use a kind of a succulent green roof, if you will. Pretty shallow rooting characteristics. It'll soften this area and it'll help clean water. We have some planters with dwarf citrus trees in these corners, and then this is also a raised planter over here. And we have this will be like a vegetable garden raised planter type of thing. And here we have a sustainably harvested hardwood like ipe or paulope, but it would be sustainably harvested for the decking up here. And then down on this lower portion, that's the corner deck. Again, we have this relationship between this deck and this tree. And here is our materials palette. We're primarily using soft greens, soft blues, a little bit of orange in our plant palette, and everything here is really rot tolerant, pretty tough. So it'll be nice to really, use some of these succulents and low grasses that do so well, rather than more standard water-hungry plants. Anyway, so this is kind of showing our palette of materials. We're going to use a little bit of this against the north wall where nothing will grow underneath the screen along Ortega Street. So some of these black pebbles. And then here's a rough idea of the planters. I kind of did an elevation of the citrus planter, and that it would be like this, just some hardwood boards on the outside stained, a little bit of warm tone on that to protect that. But there would be 3 of these on the roof. And then this raised planter here for vegetables would also have this look as well. So anyway, so that's kind of our materials. Lots of soft greens, blues, and bringing in some orange and reddish accents.
Yeah, and I think Robert's plan shows a little bit better, particularly on Ortega, that our property line is tucked back here, and the sidewalk is adjacent to the curb on Ortega. But then, it flips as you go around Olive. So there's a lot more green and planting area out in front, particularly along Olive and right at the corner.
And we studied the lines of sight, and we have things so that cars, as they make the corner, can really see through that. That information is on here. So we're just looking at the heights of things that make sense to keep things low. So,
and we did the same thing for talking to transportation about the edge of the building and the edge of the scrim. So that's also out of sight line.
So roughly, really outside of the apron, most of this is really permeable, and we're going to be this will rate tier 3 at the city. So we got to watch our stormwater. So again, this area and this area will be used primarily for that. Kim, do you want to add any other tidbit of landscape information?
Well, in the depressed areas, we are using plants that do have good root systems that can tolerate the seasonal inundation during storms, and then they can filter the pollutants out of the water, and as that drains down, then they can handle the drought conditions in the summer. So we did look at that for those types of plants for the rainwater, and we're able to find the same sorts of oranges and blues that we're using in sort of the succulents and pull that into the stormwater. So we have a continuity between the bioswale plants and what we're using for more of the ornamental, so that there's a cohesive design throughout the property.
Yeah, and that ties in with the issue of waste, the solid waste from the waste management folks, because we're all going to have washout when they're producing wine. So that occurs out here, and that will be filtered.
in the future presentation?
Yep.
This time I invite the public. Anyone from the public want to speak on this project? Seeing no one wanting to step up, I'll bring it to the board for questions.
If we can go to this illustration on this drawing so the camera can see it. So that green glass, that's kind of a spandrel condition here.
Right
is that
there.
correct?
Right, and
There's the
setback.
stair on the other side?
Yes.
Okay, and then on the elevations, it looks like there's some sort of eyebrow or sunshade or something over the fenestration. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay, but that's not reflected here.
Right.
Okay.
That was our preliminary SketchUp model.
Gotcha. I think that's it. Thank you.
Stephanie?
How are you treating the concrete block in detail? Or is it flush joint, struck joint? Is it struck joint, flush joint, running bond? I see. Colored?
It's running bond and it's gray.
Okay. It's not split face or anything like that.
No.
The question is, the planter, does it go up? It's adjacent to the wall on the inside face here. Does it stick up above the guardrail, or will you see it through that guardrail?
No, it's actually the way we were thinking about this, it would be seat height, so it would be lower than such a guardrail. 'Cause
Are you talking about these?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So these would be in front.
There's a guardrail you see through, and you would see
Right.
the planters.
Right, you'd see the planter, and that would reflect that kind of warm wood horizontals that we want to do.
Okay, that's it. Oh, the orange was not addressed.
Oh, sorry. Orange was the garage doors,
Okay, and they're just
metal roll-ups.
okay.
Kurt? Questions?
Well, I have a couple of comments that I'll sort of formulate as questions, just very quickly. Did you consider opening up the south elevation at the landscape area as well to give some relief to this wall?
Well, the problem with that is that I have my stair coming up there, so I need that wall to act as a guardrail.
Oh, okay. I thought, isn't there some portion though on the right here where the landscape is on the roof? The roof. Looking at the roof plans, is a green roof area.
Oh, could the right?
Or is that the south side?
Above that roof, I have to have a parapet that's 30 inches high.
Right, but okay. So my thought was that could be railing as opposed to block wall. That's what I'm wondering. That's my question.
I don't think it can be because that's a structural roof, and that assembly has to be separated because we're zero lot line by the 30-inch parapet roof.
Solid
Yeah,
parapet.
and I'm further constrained because I'm using block, so I have to use a block module.
Okay. And then I was just curious also about the selection for the fencing as being rebar.
Right.
Seems like kind of a rough material to be.
It's like grape steaks, and the idea, this is a winery, it's grape steak.
Okay, this is my question.
Kurt, along with that Rogers red. Well, soften that and go all through that. So we're hoping that'll be really dense and kind of interesting.
And we're trying to get a detail so we can weave the rebar, so it has some, it's just not straight.
Okay.
It's woven in and out, and it has some texture.
Okay.
And the grape dies back, and you'll see it'll die back, and the fall will be really brilliant. But
It says number 14 rebar. Is that supposed to be number 4?
Probably.
Okay, yeah. It's not, that's like 4 is like a 1/4 inch diameter. So that's sort of what you're thinking of.
I'm thinking something a little bigger than that because that's a little too
Neely.
Okay. Probably not 14.
No,
I don't know
probably
what
not.
that is. I don't know what 14 rebar is.
It's this big.
Yeah, right. Okay. Those are my questions.
So just springboarding off that, what is the material for the guardrail then? Did I miss that already?
We're using rebar for that as well.
Okay, so it's similar
Right, but
treatment.
we're not weaving it.
Okay. Other questions. What exactly, I'm not familiar with this permeable grout joint. What is the material?
It's like a grout, and they use a fiber mix in with it, and it comes in like 4 different colors. There's a gray, there's a tan, but the mix they put it in allows the water to go right through it.
It's very porous.
Yeah, but it kind of stays together as opposed to gravel could spill out, and we don't have to irrigate that surface. I also want to point out that even this is a small detail, but the pavers are in big blocks of concrete, and it actually echoes the way that the concrete block's going to be used on the building. So we're just trying to kind of mirror that. And these joints would be 2 inches wide with that grout. And I found this grout maybe 6 months ago. And then, Kim, you want to?
Need the microphone.
Okay.
And we need to point up here also for the camera. I think you've answered my question.
I think we're okay.
I don't need all the details, just kind of curious. So the exposed block wall that surrounds the parking area matches what you have happening on the building. Is that right?
Exactly.
That running bond gray? Okay. And then last question, I guess the overflow pipes from the structure go into the rain garden, and then do you have an overflow out to the street? Is that, you'll probably need one, or are you going to let it fill up and?
You mean like an emergency exit pipe?
Yep.
Yeah, we would incorporate that
so
in the
through
working drawings.
through the curb.
That's always a good idea, just in case rain gets out of hand.
Right.
It's a good idea to do that.
Okay.
It's a good point.
I think that's all I have for questions.
Comments, Keith?
First of all, I want to say I appreciate you providing all the context information and all the photos and elevations. That was really helpful. Also want to appreciate the reduction in the height that you provided from your original concept. And I think having the context elevations really, helps us evaluate it. I think given all that, I think, the reduction in size, having a lot more comfort with the scale of the project. Given that, initially I had some planning comments the first time around that I was thinking that there might be some opportunities if the building and parking were flipped, and that then you wouldn't have as much property line walls, and there'd be more opportunity for fenestration and things like that. But given the plan that site plan that you do have, I guess I'm concerned that at the street level we're just really having a solid facade. There's no real, if you're a pedestrian walking along here, this is all solid for the most part, and then you have solid roll-up doors, and then the metal cladding, which I think, with the concrete block, and given this context, I think could work. But it seems like there's a missed opportunity that there's no views into the production area from the pedestrian. And if this was flipped, you could have fenestration looking in and display the tanks, things like that. So that's kind of my biggest concern, I think, is just the very solid elevations at the pedestrian level. Would like to see in more elaboration what's exactly being proposed for the sunshade elements up on that upper floor and how it ties in with everything else, and kind of a little more detail on the cladding system for that metal siding. But again, I think, scale-wise, there's a comfort level now. I think if there were any kind of opportunities to do any further relief on the property line walls, that would be beneficial too, with any sort of rated glazing or, ins and outs or something, light well kind of thing. But I think the biggest concern is just the pedestrian experience for the neighborhood, and that there could be a real opportunity to kind of look in and see all this cool stuff inside there that's making wine that's maybe not happening. So it's maybe more that urban level at this point than the architectural concerns. That's it.
All right. Stephanie?
I really appreciate the scale, and this really helps this aerial view to get a sense of the scale of the project and in relation to the other buildings. And I appreciate the fact that you've done the reductions in the height. And I think that the planting is really going to make it more pedestrian friendly. I see what Keith is talking about on the glass. It would make it a little more pedestrian friendly. However, I think that the punch of the orange will be nice and a great complement to the planting that Robert's proposed.
My turn?
Yes.
I really appreciate Keith's comments because it hadn't really occurred to me the first time around, but in the urban design guidelines, and particularly in the downtown area, one of the fundamental guidelines is to parking in back, building in front, to hide the parking. Given we only have 3 spaces here, but it's like the corners featuring the parking as opposed to the building. And I can see you're a very talented designer, and you could do something really fabulous on this corner that features the architecture more. So I realize that shifts everything for you, but I think it's really very pertinent an excellent comment, because then you can have more fenestration on at least one other elevation. You can break that up with windows instead of just a big block wall, which is what I'm struggling with. So architecturally, I was going to say, not only are you featuring the parking, the automobiles, but you're also featuring the concrete block, because you've got the concrete block in the front, and then these 2 very large walls, still very large, unadorned, unbroken, slightly modified at the top, in one case, concrete block, which, again, I appreciate the artistry and thinking about materials and differentiation of materials and all that, but I think in context that where we have unadorned concrete walls in a lot of cases, and even in the commercial context in the older buildings, it sure would be much nicer if they were plaster, in my view. And I think this, given the hardness of the steel that you're proposing to use, which is also very foreign material to Santa Barbara, I can think of a few places where it's used as like an accent material or a canopy or something like that, but as a major facade element that is coming right down to the pedestrian level, that's not, you don't see it. It's not in Santa Barbara anyway, and so it's So I think if you're going to use that very strong, hard edge industrial material in such a predominant way, that the block ought to be all plaster, because we need the relief. The building needs the relief from that hardness, and that goes for the rebar detail too. I'm not in favor of that. I think you could use steel, of course, but not something that's so user unfriendly, especially right here along the property line. I think that's, in my view, inappropriate material for the fencing. I'd like to see changes with that. But obviously, the big issue I have now that Keith brought it up, threw light on it, it's like, you know, the light bulb went on. I think this building should be at the front and the parking in the back. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Kirk. I think you've done a lot here with the landscape, and I think that there is a lot of parking up front, but you also have a lot of planting, so I think there's a nice softening of that. I'm not going to say one way or another whether the building should be shifted and flip-flop with the where the parking is, but I think based on what we saw last time, this is a major improvement in terms of the landscape. So I'll save that comment for the architect, but I do agree, though, that I think having the exposed block and the rebar is a bit too much for this neighborhood. I think the plaster for both the wall surrounding the parking and on the building, I think would just blend much more into Santa Barbara than, you know, we don't. It's a little too industrial, I think, the way it is, and it's, you know, on two sides of this, it's pretty residential. So I think it's a bit harsh. Beyond that, you know, I like what they've done with the landscape. There's a lot of softening that's happening, as I said. The only one thing that I really noticed was the location of the olive tree was right up next to the wall, and that could be pushed out a little further. I'd be curious to see a sample of the permeable grout joint and that it doesn't break down over time and, you know, end up kind of looking bad. And I guess that's about all I have at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
I'm going to, as far as the siding of the building goes, I can see that having a building towards the front of it would be nicer, and parking in the back. But for your program, the height of your
Building that you're proposing, it wouldn't work well. You would lose your line of sight that we were talking about around the corner, and for what you're proposing, in this instance, I believe that your building is sited correctly. But I would agree that for most instances, we would want something a little closer forward. But this gives us a little setback relief from Olive Street that leaves Olive Street feeling a little more open. So I would say that in that case, it's better. I appreciate the lowering of the building. I think there still is some room in there, given the heights that you have on the elevations, that on the sections that you provided. It seems to me, let me find where's the sections at. It seems to me like some of these areas here, there may be some room for some minor reduction in height. This 17-foot or perhaps the 10-foot. There might be some areas that we can reduce that and get that 13-foot height down. And my main purpose of getting that height down is those walls. You did show us some other walls that were there, but none of them are coming all the way to the street front with a big square wall as this corner is on Ortega Street. It's going to be a huge 33-foot wall right on the corner, almost at the sidewalk, and that doesn't happen anywhere. And when there was recommendations or talk about lowering this thing, I think that's something that you need to look at. And the other thing you need to look at is not just landscaping on the roof that is for gardening or for vegetables, but something that's going to spill over the side of that building that would give some relief of that building, some greenscape, or something that is going to give some type of texture to that wall. I think that that a CMU wall, a plain bond beam wall, none of the examples that you showed us were a bond beam wall. They were either plastered, they were split faced, and so I think that is a pretty harsh element to be having in a mixed area. We're not looking at just an industrial area like where Tin City is here, right here, where the city has their building. We're talking about some craftsman homes that are right next door, and some Spanish-style homes. I mean, it is eclectic, but the international style is certainly not the most prevalent there, if there is any at all. The building that is somewhat modern or contemporary is more in a 60s-style CMU block, so I don't know if it's the same style as this. I would suggest that, like Kirk said, with the amount of scrim shield that you have on there, I think it's too much, and it should be reduced. I also think that there should be some native materials that are incorporated with this to bring it into the. We talked about Arnoli's being right on the corner, and Arnoli's is the cornerstone of the Italian stonemason era, and there's a lot of that happens on Coda Street, and a lot of that Italian stone is in the neighborhood, and I think that a small blend of that, a nod to that, maybe perhaps in the wall up front, or perhaps a column or detail someplace in it that eliminates some of that steel, would be a good gesture towards having a little bit of Santa Barbara with the blend of contemporary that you're looking for. I don't think that you can't have a contemporary style building here. I don't think that at all, but I do think it should be toned down a little bit. And
Can I add something after you're done?
yeah, and that would be my comments. Go ahead.
To soften that wall, would the board feel better if it were covered with an ivy or proposed relief in some way of ivy or ficus repens or creeping fig, something like that? A green wall?
You mean the back of the building?
Yeah.
I don't think there's an opportunity to do that. It's not right on the property.
But if could be pulled in.
Well, I had the same concern that Gary was mentioning about that front corner of the wall, especially where it goes straight up.
Where, here?
Yeah, right there. Yeah, right at so close to the sidewalk and the front property line there. And I didn't mention it in my comments, but I think there's a number of ways that you could lessen the impact of that as well. So I'll just, since it's getting late, I'm going to go ahead and propose a motion. I think that since the board is not unanimous in the, well, we could take a vote, I guess. How does the board feel in regards to asking the applicant to move the building forward?
I'd like to weigh in on that. I think
There's lots of ways they could soften that wall.
I think perhaps this partie for the site plan could work if other things were, other elements were provided, like the fenestration. Again, it's all solid entirely at the street level. So I don't, in my mind, that's not an absolute, but I think some of the articulation with fenestration and a pedestrian concern is needed.
On the two walls that currently don't have any, is that what you're referring to?
No, he's talking about the roll-up doors.
Everywhere, but particularly at the
Okay.
at the two public faces.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let you formulate that comment now.
Let's see what you got.
Go ahead.
Okay. This will be indefinite continuance back to full board with the following comments. Board appreciates the reduction in building height and feels that the mass is at a compatible scale with the eclectic neighborhood. Board appreciates the extensive landscape features, but a number of board members have concern with the masonry and steel wall and fence items at the pedestrian level. Board has concerns about the lack of fenestration at the ground level, and board also has concerns about the extent of the concrete block property line walls without any articulation or fenestration scale giving elements, and also has similar concerns about the extent of the metal cladding. And some of the board members have concerns with the property line wall extending to the pedestrian level along Ortega Street. And I think that's all I have.
Second on that?
Okay.
Okay, do we have any under discussion? Anything under discussion we want to vote on? Should we vote on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Discussion or no? Okay. That's it. So that concludes tonight's
At least go with the cupcakes.
PBR.
It's almost all the right colors.
Have a cupcake.